They say betrayal doesn't knock. It walks straight through your front door wearing a smile you used to trust. My name is Jack Mercer, and 3 nights ago, I thought I was living the dream. A 2-story farmhouse, a construction business I built with my own hands, and a wife who looked like success itself. That dream ended at a neighbor's barbecue. One careless laugh, one whispered secret, and I learned the child growing inside my wife's belly doesn't carry my blood. It belongs to her boss. 12 weeks along. Conceived while I was out of town, working overtime to keep this family afloat. You'd think a man would scream, break things, maybe beg. I didn't. I just stood there with a beer bottle slipping from my hand, shattering on concrete, and a truth hitting harder than any fist. I never really knew the woman I married. And if you think that was the worst part, you haven't heard what came next. From the outside, my life looked like a picture torn from one of those glossy American magazines. I owned a 2-story farmhouse with a wraparound porch I'd been fixing piece by piece for years. The kind of place neighbors would slow their cars to admire when the evening sun hit the siding just right. My construction business, Mercer Contracting, wasn't flashy, but it paid the bills. I built kitchens where families gathered, porches where couples rocked side by side, roofs that kept out the Maine snow. And then there was Lauren. She had that polished look that turned heads in grocery store aisles, sharp suits, heels clicking like a metronome, hair that never seemed out of place. While I came home dusted in sawdust and sweat, she'd glide in smelling like expensive perfume and boardroom victories. To me, it felt like balance. I handled the bones of our world, she carried its shine. Together, we looked unstoppable. Together, I thought we were unbreakable. It was one of those late summer Saturdays when the whole town seemed to drift toward backyard smoke and paper plates. Carol Whitman, my neighbor with the sharpest eyes and the loudest gossip, was hosting her annual barbecue. Kids ran between picnic tables, country music hummed from a cheap speaker, and I stood by the fence nursing a cold beer, letting the chatter roll over me. Lauren moved through the crowd like she owned it, designer sundress catching the light, smile perfectly rehearsed. I watched her from a distance, proud in that quiet way a working man gets when he thinks he's lucky. But pride curdled fast. I caught her voice carrying over the sizzle of burgers, speaking to her best friend, Brooke Sloan. "So, when are you telling Jack about the little surprise?" Brooke's tone had that cruel lilt, like she already knew more than I ever should. Lauren laughed. A sharp, brittle sound. "Why ruin a good thing? Richard says we wait until after the promotion." The name hit me like a nail through the boot sole. Richard Hale, her boss. Silver-haired, 6'2", the kind of man who parked his German car in front of buildings he didn't just work in, he owned them. I'd seen him at company dinners, the handshake that lingered, the way Lauren's posture shifted when he walked into a room. I'd chalked it up to ambition, the natural awe a junior executive shows the man holding her future. But hearing his name roll off her tongue at a neighborhood barbecue, tied to my wife's secret, was something else. Brooke leaned closer, almost gleeful. "And the timing?" Lauren smirked, sipping from her wine glass like it was a joke only they understood. "Valentine's week. Perfect cover. Jack was away anyway." The beer bottle slipped from my hand, shattering on Carol's concrete patio. Heads turned, conversations died. I didn't explain, couldn't. I just walked, each step heavier than the last, knowing something in my foundation had cracked for good. The sound of glass breaking carried farther than I wanted. 1 second it was music and laughter, the next it was silence and eyes. The beer bottle had slipped, shattered across Carol Whitman's patio, amber foaming across the concrete like spilled truth. Conversations stalled mid-sentence. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Kids stopped chasing each other. And all at once, I felt every gaze land on me. Carol peeked over her sunglasses, already calculating the story she'd retell by morning. Brooke gave a little smirk, like she enjoyed the show. Lauren didn't flinch. She just turned her back, whispering something I couldn't hear, letting the moment slide off her like rain on glass. I stood there, broken shards at my boots, with nothing to say that wouldn't explode into something worse. So I walked. Past the tables, past the stairs, out the gate, jaw locked tight. My neighbors thought they saw a clumsy husband. What they really saw was a man carrying suspicion home like dynamite. Back home, I didn't pace or punch walls. I did what builders do when something feels off. I checked the plans. Our shared life lived on a synced calendar, Dentist reminders, supply runs, her board meetings color-coded in cool blues. I scrolled through the week with fingers that didn't feel like mine, past dinners I cooked and flights I'd taken alone, until a line item blinked like a hazard light. Tuesday, 10:20 a.m. Dr. Sarah Williams, Women's Health. Lauren had labeled it routine checkup. Gray, quiet, meant to blend in. But routine didn't fit the way Brooke said surprise, or the way Lauren laughed like glass. I tapped the entry. Address downtown. Notes locked. A second notification I'd never seen before. An auto-forward to her work email. Neat, controlled, hidden in plain sight. I stared at that appointment the way I stare at a hairline fracture in a joist. Small to the eye, deadly to the house. My thumb hovered over delete and didn't move. Instead, I screenshotted everything, set my own silent alert for 9:40, and whispered to the empty kitchen, "If it's routine, it won't mind being seen." Tuesday came fast, the way deadlines always do when you're praying for more time. I left the house early, pretending I had a supply run, but instead I parked 2 streets over and waited. At 9:45, right on cue, Lauren's silver BMW eased out of the driveway, polished and perfect like its owner. I followed from 3 car lengths back, the old F-150 rumbling low, every mile a knot tightening in my chest. She didn't head toward the office. She drove past it, past Main Street, past the river, straight into downtown, toward the medical complex that swallowed half a city block. She pulled into the women's health wing, stepped out in heels too sharp for a Tuesday morning, and walked inside like she owned the place. I stayed in the truck, hands gripping the wheel so hard the leather creaked. A construction man sitting in a rusted pickup, watching his wife stride into a clinic she hadn't told him about. I told myself it was nothing. I already knew it wasn't. An hour crawled by, every minute heavier than the last. I counted cars pulling in and out, memorized license plates, anything to keep from picturing what was happening behind those frosted glass doors. When Lauren finally reappeared, the fall air seemed to bend around her. She wasn't pale or shaken or tired the way routine checkups leave you. She was glowing, smiling like she hadn't in months. I lowered my window just enough. The sound carried across the lot, sharp and clear. "Richard, it's confirmed. 12 weeks. Yes, I know. He doesn't suspect a thing." The words landed harder than any punch. My ribs actually ached. My hands shook on the steering wheel. 12 weeks. I did the math before she even reached her car. Valentine's week. I'd been 3 states away on a renovation job, calling every night while she claimed she was down with the flu. Now I knew what kind of sickness it really was. Not fever, not flu. Betrayal, with my wife smiling as she delivered the news to another man. The math wouldn't leave me alone. 12 weeks. That put conception squarely on Valentine's week, the week I'd been holed up in Portland finishing a commercial renovation. I could still smell the drywall dust, still feel the motel sheets stiff with bleach. 3 days of long hours, cheap takeout, and video calls with Lauren where she looked pale and claimed she had the flu. I remember sending flowers, roses delivered to our farmhouse porch, with a handwritten note. "When I get back, we'll make it up to each other." She'd texted a heart emoji, just one, no words. At the time, I told myself she was too sick to write more. Now the puzzle snapped together in ugly clarity, the jewelry that showed up without receipts. The client dinners that stretched past midnight, the way she'd started looking at me like I was a burden she couldn't shake. I'd been pouring concrete in another town, building someone else's dream, while Richard Hale was in my house, rewriting mine into a nightmare. That evening I sat in the half-finished living room, the smell of cut lumber and dust hanging heavy in the air. The porch beams I'd stacked outside leaned like tired soldiers, waiting for me to give them purpose. But I couldn't lift a hammer. I just waited. At 6 o'clock sharp, Lauren's BMW rolled into the driveway. She came in balancing a glossy takeout bag from the Thai place on Main, the kind of food we only bought when there was something to celebrate. She looked radiant, cheeks flushed, hair falling perfectly against her blazer. For a heartbeat, I remembered the woman I'd married. Then the memory soured. I stepped in her path before she reached the kitchen. My voice came out low, tighter than I meant. "We need to talk." She froze, bag crinkling in her hand, eyes narrowing just a fraction. Then her smile returned. Polished. Practiced. "About what?" I didn't blink. About Richard Hale. About the baby you're carrying that isn't mine. The air snapped between us like a live wire. For a moment she didn't move, just stood there in the doorway with the takeout bag dangling from her fingers. I waited for denial, for the instinctive shake of the head, for a tear maybe. Instead, Lauren's lips curved into a smile so sharp it could have cut glass. "Took you long enough to figure it out," she said, brushing past me as if I were nothing more than a wall in her way. She set the food down on the counter, peeled off her blazer, and tossed it onto a chair with casual elegance. "That's it?" I asked, my voice sounding strange in my own ears. "What do you want me to say, Jack? That I'm sorry? That it didn't mean anything?" She laughed, a short, cruel sound that bounced around the unfinished walls. "It means everything. Richard can give me things you never could. Status, security, a future that doesn't smell like sawdust." Her hand drifted unconsciously to her stomach. That's when I realized she wasn't ashamed. She was proud. I stared at her, trying to match this cold stranger with the woman I'd once carried across a threshold. "We own this house outright," I said, words clipped. "My business keeps food on the table. We're not drowning, Lauren. We're solid." She gave me that look, half pity, half disdain. "Solid?" She almost laughed. "Jack, your little contracting jobs are small time. Patching roofs, building porches for people who can barely pay you on schedule. Richard Hale is offering me real security, a vice president's salary, benefits that don't depend on whether it rains next week." Her hand lingered on her stomach again, nails tapping against silk. "And his baby? That's a future with private schools, trust funds, doors already open, not broken dreams nailed together in a dying mill town." Every word was measured, designed to sting, and they did. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. "Then pack your things. You're leaving tonight." The air between us tightened until it felt like the house itself was holding its breath. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed, eyes glittering with the kind of arrogance only someone convinced they've already won can carry. I stepped closer, every muscle in my body straining not to explode. My voice came out flat, stripped of every ounce of affection I'd once had for her. "Go upstairs. Pack now." Lauren tilted her head, lips curling into a smile that wasn't a smile at all. "You're being dramatic, Jack. You'll cool off. We can work this out." I shook my head, jaw locked. "You're leaving. Tonight." She laughed softly, shaking her head like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "You don't mean that. You've always needed me." "No," I said, pointing toward the stairs. "I needed a wife, not a liar, not a parasite. Pack. Now." For the first time all evening, her confidence flickered. Just for a second. But I saw it. I didn't wait for another excuse. I stormed up the stairs, yanked her designer suitcases from the closet, and dragged them into the bedroom. The sound of zippers ripping open filled the house as I threw handfuls of silk blouses and heels onto the bed. Lauren hovered in the doorway, arms folded, still wearing that thin smile like armor. "You can't kick me out," she said, voice calm but brittle. "I live here too. Watch me." I shoved her clothes into the cases, slammed them shut, and hauled them down the stairs two at a time. My boots pounded the steps, echoing like a war drum in the hollow house. At the front door, I threw the suitcases out onto the gravel driveway. They landed hard, bursting open, heels, blouses, and lingerie scattering across the stones like confetti from a party no one wanted to remember. Lauren gasped, cheeks flushing red. But I didn't flinch. I just stood in the doorway, chest heaving, finally feeling like the one doing the leaving. The thud of the suitcases still echoed when I felt it, that prickling sense you get when eyes are on you. I glanced to the left, and there she was, Carol Whitman, bent over her rose bushes with pruning shears in hand, though she hadn't clipped a thing in minutes. Sunglasses perched on her nose, but I could tell she was watching every detail. Lauren scrambled to gather her clothes, silk sleeves and lace spilling through her fingers, her face pale beneath the porch light. She tried to shove the blouses back into the case, but the zipper jammed, and a pair of heels toppled into the gravel. Carol didn't say a word, just tilted her head, the way a cat watches a bird too wounded to fly. Lauren's voice rose sharp. "You're making a mistake, Jack!" I slammed the door in her face. No, I'm fixing one. Through the window I saw Carol's smirk. By sunrise the whole town would know. Lauren Mercer had been thrown out of her own house like yesterday's trash, and I was fine with that. Midnight settled heavy over the farmhouse, the kind of silence you only get in small-town Maine, just crickets, the faint rush of wind through the pines, and the creak of lumber stacked on my half-built porch. I was halfway through a second beer when headlights swept across the front yard, not the sharp, familiar beams of Lauren's BMW. Bigger, darker. A black Escalade rolled to a stop at the edge of the gravel drive, engine idling low like a growl. Doors opened in sequence, first the driver, then two shadows, then a third figure I recognized instantly. Marcus Vaughn, Richard Hale's head of security. Ex-military, 6'4", all muscle wrapped in an expensive suit that couldn't hide the weight under his left arm. I'd seen him at town functions, silent as a guard dog. Now he was on my porch. I stood, set my beer down, and reached for the old aluminum bat leaning by the door. My pulse thudded steady. 3 men against 1 contractor. They weren't here to talk. The Escalade's headlights cut off, leaving only the hum of its engine and the crunch of gravel under polished shoes. Marcus Vaughn stepped forward first, shoulders squared, jaw clenched in that practiced military way. Behind him came 2 younger men, the kind you recognize without needing names, fresh out of prison or heading there soon. Tattoos creeping out from starched collars, eyes scanning my property like they already owned it. Marcus smiled, too perfect, too white. Easy there, contractor boy. We just want to have a conversation. I tightened my grip on the bat. Nothing to talk about. One of the younger men chuckled, pulling at his leather gloves. Boss says otherwise. Marcus's smile never wavered. You've been harassing his girl. That's not very neighborly. His girl, my wife until 6 hours ago. The words burned. I stepped down from the porch, bat resting against my shoulder. Funny how things change. The night went still. 3 against 1, and every instinct told me I was already standing in a fight I wasn't supposed to win. Marcus stopped a few feet from me, hands open like he was being reasonable, though his voice carried the weight of a man used to obedience. Here's how this works, Jack. You're going to take Lauren back. No questions, no attitude. You're going to smile for the neighbors, play the proud husband, and when that baby shows up, you're going to call it yours. Nice and quiet. Everyone wins. I felt the bat heavy in my hands, knuckles whitening. And if I don't? His smile widened, shark-like. Then we get creative. Maybe your truck burns down. Maybe a client decides you're sloppy with permits. Maybe you fall off a scaffold one day and nobody's around to catch you. Richard doesn't like loose ends. One of his men laughed, low and cruel. The other cracked his knuckles like punctuation. I spat on the gravel. That's not my kid, and I won't live someone else's lie. Marcus's eyes went cold. Then you just volunteered for the hard lesson. My chest burned, but not with fear, with the kind of anger that makes a man feel heavier, steadier, like rebar and concrete. I shifted the bat from shoulder to grip, feet planted in the gravel. 3 against 1, I said. Doesn't sound fair. Marcus chuckled, low and amused. Fair's got nothing to do with it. He took another step closer, cologne mixing with the night air, drowning out the scent of pine and sawdust. His hand twitched toward the bulge under his arm. That was my opening. I swung. Aluminum cracked against ribs with a sound that cut through the night like a gunshot. Marcus staggered, a grunt tearing out of him, surprise flashing in his eyes. For half a second I thought I'd evened the odds. Then the others moved, fast, practiced, brutal. A telescoping baton snapped open, catching my forearm. The other slammed a fist into my ribs. The bat slipped from my hands. Stars exploded behind my eyes. And in that moment I knew. This wasn't a fight. It was a message. The world narrowed to fists, boots, and the metallic snap of the baton. My arms gave way first, then my knees. Gravel bit into my palms before another strike sent me sprawling flat. Somewhere above me, Marcus wheezed through broken ribs, but his voice was steady enough. Teach him how Richard handles disrespect. The next blow caught me across the jaw. White light flared, then blackness rushed in like a tide. When I came back, It was in fragments, voices muffled, the stench of motor oil, the vibration of tires over back roads. My wrists burned from plastic ties cinched tight behind me, my head pounding with every pothole. The air was stale, metal hot against my cheek. I realized then they'd stuffed me in the trunk of the Escalade like scrap lumber tossed aside. Every bump slammed my ribs, every turn threatened to pull me back under. I tried to shout, but duct tape sealed my mouth. The only sound I managed was a muffled groan, swallowed by the roar of the engine. The Escalade finally lurched to a stop, gravel giving way to soft earth. The trunk creaked open, cold night air flooding in. A massive hand, Marcus's, hauled me out by my collar and dumped me onto pine needles slick with dew. The October chill hit me harder than the fists had. I was in the woods, deep enough that the silence swallowed everything but my ragged breathing. They yanked me upright, my wrists still zip-tied behind me, plastic cutting into skin. One of the younger thugs shoved me against a pine tree, bark grinding into my back. My chest heaved, ribs screaming with every breath. Marcus crouched in front of me, eyes gleaming despite the pain I'd given him earlier. He pulled a hunting knife from his belt, the blade catching moonlight like a silver threat. He pressed it against my throat, not hard enough to cut deep, but enough to leave a burning line. "You don't touch what belongs to Richard Hale," he said, voice low, steady. "You don't threaten what belongs to Richard Hale, and you sure as hell don't embarrass him." I forced the words past split lips, my throat tight against the cold edge of steel. "She's not property." Marcus's smile thinned, almost pitying, like he was explaining simple math to a child. He leaned closer, the knife pressing just enough to sting. "Everything is property if you've got the money to buy it. Houses, towns, people, even you, Mercer." The younger goon chuckled, circling behind me. "Cheap labor, boss. Contractor discount." Marcus didn't laugh. His eyes stayed locked on mine, calm and unshaken. "You think because you swing a hammer and own a truck that you're a man? You're a line item, replaceable. Richard could buy 10 of you before breakfast and never notice the dent in his wallet." The knife lifted, then traced a thin red line down my neck. "Your mistake was thinking you were free. Men like me, we know better. We work for power. Men like you belong to it." The night pressed in, heavy and absolute. And for the first time I realized this lesson wasn't about fear, it was about ownership. They yanked me off the ground and dragged me deeper into the woods, boots scraping over rocks and roots. My shoulders screamed as the zip ties cut deeper, plastic biting through skin slick with blood and sweat. A pine tree loomed ahead, its trunk wide enough to swallow me whole. They spun me around, slammed my back against the bark, and cinched fresh ties around my chest and arms until I could barely breathe. The knife disappeared, but the ache it left across my throat burned hotter than fire. My ribs throbbed where the batons had landed. My head pounded with each beat of my heart. The October air clawed at my bare skin, stealing warmth faster than I could hold it. When the Escalade's headlights vanished into the trees, silence swallowed me. Just whined in the branches, just the faint cry of coyotes in the distance. Pain blurred into despair. Tied to that tree, stripped to my boxers and boots, I understood what they wanted most. Not to kill me, but to watch me break. The night stretched into forever. Every breath stung my ribs. Every shiver rattled through the ties, cutting off circulation in my arms. Bark dug into my back until it felt like the tree itself was chewing me alive. I worked my wrists against the rough trunk, skin tearing raw, blood slicking the plastic. The cold was the real enemy. October in Maine doesn't forgive. My teeth clattered so hard I thought they might chip. I forced myself to stay awake, whispering curses into the darkness, muttering Lauren's name, Richard's name, anything to keep my mind from drifting. Anger was fuel. Pain was proof I was still alive. Hours crawled past. Coyotes howled and fell silent. The stars faded to gray. And just as the first light of dawn seeped through the canopy, I felt it, the tie giving way, fibers fraying against bark. With one last wrench, it snapped. I collapsed forward, arms numb, wrists bleeding, but free. The cold morning air cut deep, but for the first time all night, I breathed like a man still fighting. I staggered through scrub and shadow until the trees thinned and a rutted logging road cut the woods like a scar. My legs shook with every step. My wrists were raw meat. When I finally hit pavement, the world tilted and went gray. A horn blared, brakes squealed, and an old F-150 rolled to a stop sideways. The driver's door swung open. Frank Dwyer, retired cop, beard like steel wool, eyes that missed nothing, took me in with one sweep. "Hell, Jack." He stripped his flannel overshirt and wrapped it around my shoulders before I could fall. "Hospital?" he asked. I shook my head, voice a rasp. "No cops. Not yet." He studied me a beat longer, then nodded. "My cabin. The next hour smelled like iodine, instant coffee, and wood smoke. Frank cleaned the cuts, taped my ribs, and set a chipped mug of broth in my hands. I told him everything. Lauren, Richard Hale, the Escalade, the knife at my throat. He listened the way good men do. Quiet, steady, no judgment. When I finished, he leaned back, jaw set. "Men like Hale don't warn twice. So what's the plan, son?" For the first time since the bottle shattered, I had an answer forming. Frank's cabin felt like an old boot, scuffed, reliable, warm where it mattered. He set me at the kitchen table, slid a towel under my elbows, and opened a metal first aid kit that looked older than both of us. Iodine burned bright lines across the cuts on my neck. Butterfly closures stitched the worst of them into obedience. He wrapped my ribs with athletic tape, firm enough to hurt, tight enough to hold. "Breathe," he said. I did, and it sounded like gravel. I told him everything between sips of black coffee. Carol's barbecue, Brooke's whisper, the clinic, 12 weeks, Lauren's smile when I said the word baby, the Escalade, Marcus Vaughn's knife, the tree, the cold, how freedom felt like plastic snapping in dawn light. Frank didn't interrupt. He just watched, eyes steady under a ridge of gray brows, the way men trained to read bad nights look at you. When I finally ran out of words, he nodded once. "No hospital," I said. "No sheriff. Not yet." "Smart," he answered. "Men like Richard Hale don't warn twice. You'll need proof, not pity." That was the first time my anger hardened into a plan. "Men like Richard Hale don't warn twice," Frank said, cinching the tape around my ribs. "Next time isn't a lesson. It's a cleanup." The words sat in my gut like a brick. I wasn't going to outpunch hired muscle or outspend a man who bought judges' gala tables by the 10-pack. If I was going to survive, I had to build something stronger than rage. "Proof, not pity," Frank added, sliding a yellow legal pad across the table. I started a list with a carpenter's neat block letters. Back up the shared calendar. Photograph the bruises. Doctor visit. Document everything. Export bank statements. Pull permits and bid records. Public files. Council minutes. Campaign donations. Names bubbled up. Suppliers, site inspectors, a town clerk who owed me for a winter roof. We parked my truck behind Frank's shed, killed the cabin's porch light, and let the town think I'd gone to ground. I borrowed a flannel, a burner flip phone, and a little of Frank's stubborn calm. I wasn't going to swing harder. I was going to build tighter, nails, facts, and daylight where Hale lived in shadow. Frank says paper beats power, so I started stacking paper. First thing, document the damage. Frank took photos of every bruise under bright kitchen light, a tape measure and frame for scale, and a folded morning newspaper for date. I wrote a statement in my own hand, time, place, what was said, then signed and slid it into a manila envelope. Next, our shared life. I exported the family calendar to a thumb drive, screenshotted Lauren's routine checkup, and pulled our phone bill from the carrier portal, call times, numbers, the midnight gaps that suddenly made sense. I downloaded bank and card statements, highlighting charges that never fit our budget. Jewelry on a Tuesday, the Riverside Motel twice, executive dining at hours no client eats, then public records. At the library's dusty terminals, I ran property and corporate filings, Hale Development Partners, RHD Holdings, a daisy chain of LLCs that wrapped half the town in legal plastic. Council minutes, no bid contracts, campaign donations that always seemed to arrive the week before a vote. Finally, muscle. I logged Marcus Vaughn's patterns. Gym at 6, Mickey's Bar Tuesdays, the black Mercedes parked in the alley. I packed duplicates of everything into 3 places: Frank's safe, a storage unit, and a bank box. If Hale wanted a war, I'd fight with receipts. In a big city, you hire investigators. In a small town, you buy coffee and shut up long enough for people to talk. Frank made a few calls that didn't sound like calls, just old friends checking in. By noon I had a circuit. Gus at the diner topping off my mug, Denise at Mickey's polishing glasses, Ray at Apex Auto, with grease up to his elbows, Walt in the permits office, and Lydia at the clerk's desk who files everything and forgets nothing. I didn't ask for secrets. I asked for patterns. Denise remembered Tuesdays, Marcus's whiskey and the black Mercedes idling in the alley. Ray had swapped a cracked taillight on that same car after some bar scuffle. Walt slid me copies of council minutes where Richard Hale's companies kept winning without bids. Lydia pointed me to donation logs that bloomed the week before those votes. Gus shook his head and told me which contractors had been encouraged to walk away from jobs Hale wanted. I wrote it all down on a yellow pad. Arrows, dates, addresses, no illegal digging, just daylight. By sundown, a shape emerged. Muscle in the alleys, favors at City Hall, fear doing the rest. And for the first time, I knew where to swing next. Rich men don't bleed money first, they bleed reputation. The more I mapped Richard Hale, the clearer it got. His empire ran on pride. He never used side doors. He parked his Bentley out front for the cameras, shook the mayor's hand exactly where the banner framed his logo, made sure his name landed on every program, gold sponsor, chairman, visionary. He didn't just win contracts, he collected applause. Behind closed doors, he bought silence with favors and fear. In public, he bought awe. That was the seam. Strip the awe and the fear would follow. Denise at Mickey's remembered he snapped when a bartender called him Rick. Walt swore Hale rewrote a ribbon cutting because the angle hit his cufflinks. Lydia grinned, telling me he had a PR firm ghostwrite op-eds under Concerned Citizen. Men like that don't survive laughter. They survive lawsuits, rumors, even subpoenas, but not humiliation. You don't outspend them. You make them look small in a town that worships big. So I stopped thinking about courts and started thinking about crowds. Not punches, punchlines, not secrecy, spotlights. First you nick the enforcer, then you make the king stumble where everyone can see him. After that, the throne wobbles on its own. Stakeouts aren't glamorous. They're thermos coffee gone cold and a stiff neck from watching a rearview mirror. For 3 nights I tailed Marcus Vaughn the way a carpenter tracks a bowed board. Slow, patient, eyes on the warp. He hit the same marks like a man on rails. 600 at Iron Forge Gym, heavy bag, deadlifts, protein shake. 0815 he ghosted into Hale's office. 1210 curbside sandwich, always turkey, always alone. 1730 back to the office. Tuesdays at 2345 like clockwork, Mickey's bar. The black Mercedes was my metronome, ceramic tint, vanity plate with a smug hint only rich men choose. He parked in the alley behind Mickey's, away from foot traffic and security cams, under a busted light that left a perfect blind spot between the dumpster and the back door. He favored his left side. My swing had done its work, reaching across his ribs before he sat. Holster under the jacket, habit touch at the latch, ego in the stride. I logged plates, timestamps, angles, mapped exits, learned which door the bartender propped open for smoke breaks. When the pattern was tight enough to hang weight on, I started assembling the tools that don't show up in a police report. Zip ties, duct tape, a cooler, and a plan built for humiliation, not hospital bills. Tuesdays make men lazy. By midnight, Mickey's was bleeding noise, jukebox twang, laughter leaking through the back door the bartender kept propped for smoke. I waited in the alley's busted light, where the camera didn't reach and the dumpster masked silhouettes. The Mercedes nosed in right on schedule, engine ticking as it cooled. Marcus Vaughn stepped out slow, favoring his left ribs, jacket falling just enough to show the bulge of a holster before he palmed it shut. I'd already walked the ground a dozen times, counted paces from door to bumper, mapped the shadow where a man disappears. Zip ties in my pocket, duct tape, a small cooler sweating at my feet. Not to break him, to brand him. He got halfway to the driver's side when I stepped from the dark. Remember me? My voice didn't need to be loud. The alley carried it. His hand twitched toward the jacket latch. Muscle memory, not thought. I lifted the aluminum bat, elbows tight like I was setting a nail. Careful, he said, smiling thin. You won't like how this ends. Neither will you, I answered, lining up the swing. I aimed for the hand that kept ghosting his holster. The bat met knuckles with a hollow crack that bounced off brick. Marcus Vaughn hissed, fingers exploding open. The pistol skittered across wet pavement, spun once under the busted light, then slid toward the alley grate. I was there first. One hard kick, and the gun vanished into the storm drain with a metallic gulp. He reached for the baton at his hip, muscle memory again. I stepped in and chopped the bat across his forearm, then raked it down his thigh. The big man buckled, one knee slamming pavement. For the first time since my porch, I saw doubt in his eyes. "Easy, contractor," he rasped. "You're making this worse." "Not for me." I yanked his jacket over his shoulders like a straitjacket, spun him into the open door of the Mercedes, and drove him back into the seat. 2 zip ties cinched his wrists to the wheel spokes. Duct tape sealed the deal, one strip across each forearm, one across his chest for good measure. I thumbed his phone from his pocket, flipped the camera, and held it up. "Smile," I said. "Lessons on you tonight." The plan wasn't pain, it was permanent embarrassment. I popped the Mercedes hood, felt around the cowl, then ducked under the dash where the blower motor lived. From the small cooler at my feet, I pulled 2-gallon bags of raw shrimp, pink, slick, already sweating. I worked them deep into the vents and under the carpeting lip, places even a detailer wouldn't see on the first 3 tries. Marcus writhed against the ties. "You're dead, Mercer." "Maybe," I said, clicking the climate controls to max heat, fan full blast, recirc on. I cracked each window an inch so the stink could crawl out and introduce itself to Main Street. Then I pressed his hazards, bathing the alley in urgent orange. I stepped back and snapped photos with his phone. The security chief of Richard Hale, sweating, zip-tied, jacket half off, mouth running while the cabin slowly turned into a bait shop in August. One clean shot of the dash, heat pegged, one of the shrimp bag peeking from the footwell. "Send," I said, thumbing post to every account he owned. Class dismissed. By morning, the alley lesson had legs. Denise at Mickey's slid a phone across the bar, Marcus zip-tied to his own wheel, hazards blinking, windows cracked like a terrarium. Gus at the diner held court with the same photos on a greasy screen. Griggs Mill Chatter, our private Facebook, was a bonfire. Catfish emojis, low-tide Mercedes captions, someone looping sea shanty music over the clip. Even Carol Whitman chimed in. Air freshener suggestions? I kept my head down at a window install while the town did what towns do: share, embellish, remember. By lunch, a tow truck hauled the Mercedes past Maine, heat still pegged, stink blooming like a crime. The detailer refused it on the lot. Rumor said they had to tarp the thing and park it by the river. Marcus didn't show for the gym, didn't post his usual whiskey at midnight story either. When a man's job is fear, laughter is a layoff notice. He could still swing fists, but the uniform, polished menace, silent aura, had split a seam. I didn't celebrate. I took notes. First the enforcer, next the king. You don't topple a throne with a punch. You do it with a punchline the whole town won't stop repeating. Bullies love back rooms. I chose daylight. I parked my beat-up F-150 in the front row of Hale Development like I'd bought the spot. Thermos on the dash, arm out the window. I watched the glass doors breathe suits and lanyards. Folks glanced at me, then at my truck's dented fender, then looked away. That's fine. Daylight isn't loud. It's patient. At 10:03, the doors parted, and out came Richard Hale. Silver hair crisp, cufflinks throwing sparks, 2 new gorillas wearing earpieces, and the expression men wear when they think they are the law. He was saying something to a receptionist when his eyes found me. I rolled my window down and smiled like we were old neighbors. "Beautiful morning, isn't it, Richard?" The security detail tensed, waiting for a nod. He didn't give it. Not here. Not with a dozen phones pointed our way and a city councilman stepping off the curb. He swallowed, lifted his chin, and slid into the Bentley like a man entering a foxhole. I gave a friendly wave as they pulled out. No chase, no threat, just a message. I wasn't hiding anymore. Daylight was my lawyer now. I didn't need audio to hear it, the way Richard Hale swallowed rage like a man choking on his own pride. Through the Bentley's tinted glass I caught the profile. Jaw clenched, temple pulsing, the practiced smile curdling at the edges. My little wave wasn't a threat. It was worse. It was disrespect in daylight. Men like him can digest lawsuits and rumors. They can't stomach being waved at like just another suit. He lifted his phone before the door even shut. I pictured the chain reaction. A call to PR. Get me talking points. A call to legal. Prep a letter. A call to Marcus Vaughn, or whoever replaced him. Fix this. The two new gorillas stared at me the way men do when they're waiting for permission to break a law. It didn't come. Too many witnesses, too many cameras. Across the lot, a receptionist pretended to read her screen while filming. A councilman pretended not to stare. I drained my coffee, let the silence do what fists can't, and set the cup back on the dash. He drove off, white-knuckled. I didn't follow. You don't chase a king. You make him feel watched. Late afternoon light slanted through the pines when a car crunched up Frank's gravel drive. I recognized the silhouette before the engine cut. Lauren in a fitted maternity dress that tried to sell control she didn't have. She didn't bother with hello. "We need to talk," she said, eyeing the cabin like it smelled of poor decisions. "Out here's fine," I answered, not moving from the porch step. Frank stayed inside, a quiet shape behind the screen. She folded her arms beneath the curve of her belly. "This has to stop, Jack. Richard's attorneys are preparing a letter, restraining orders, defamation. You're harassing me." I took a breath that pinched my taped ribs. "Tell Richard his legal threats can take a number. I'm busy." "You think this is a game? You got lucky once. Next time," she swallowed, "next time they won't just scare you." "Maybe," I said. "But before any next time, this town is going to know exactly who you are and what you did." Her polish cracked, just a hairline. "You wouldn't." "I already started," I lied, testing the seam. "Truth moves fast here." She glanced back at the road like a runner sizing the distance, then looked at me. Really looked, searching for the old husband who'd cave. He wasn't home. "I'm not negotiating," I said. "There's nothing to talk about." Lauren's jaw set. For a second I saw the boardroom version of her, the one who wins by waiting you out. Then she turned, heels grinding gravel, and drove off beneath the pines. Frank pushed the screen open with a knuckle. "You light the fuse?" "I said I did," I answered, easing back onto the step, ribs protesting. Truth has a way of traveling without me. My phone buzzed like a hive. Griggs Mill Chatter, our private Facebook, was on fire. A new post from Carol Whitman. "Hate to be the messenger, but Riverside Motel, 11:42 p.m., 2 nights in a row." 4 photos followed. Lauren and Richard Hale under a flickering sign, his hand on the small of her back, her face tipped up toward his. Timestamps, plate numbers. The comments bloomed fast. Knew it. "Saw them at Rivers Cafe last week, thought it was odd. That baby math ain't hard." I didn't reply. I didn't have to. In small towns, rumor is a spark. Receipts are gasoline. And tonight, I watched the fire catch without lifting a match. By dusk, Carol Whitman had upgraded from gossip to archivist. Her post turned into an album titled Public Service for Griggs Mill. 12 photos, tight captions, timestamps stamped like court seals. First frame, the Riverside Motel marquee flickering, 11:42 p.m. Second, Richard Hale's hand at the small of Lauren's back, her chin tipped up, that practiced smile. Third, a wide shot catching both plates, his Bentley, her BMW, parked nose to nose like old friends. Carol even circled the valet stub tucked in Hale's visor, red marker, 11:38 check-in. Then she added context the way only a neighbor who never blinks can. A screenshot of Lauren's late client dinner on the shared calendar, a cropped charge from an executive dining spot 2 towns over, a grainy still from Rivers Cafe 2 weeks prior, Brooke Sloan's reflection starring in the window glass. The comments multiplied, contractors I knew, moms from the school run, a deacon, each dropping a memory that suddenly made sense. Someone overlaid a map with pins, motel, cafe, office garage, a pattern you couldn't unsee. My phone pinged non-stop. I pictured Lauren's doing the same, only hers wasn't buzzing with sympathy. It was judgment wearing a familiar face. The album did what storms do, blew roofs off fast. By morning my phone filled with numbers I hadn't seen in years. Not condolences, forwards. Screenshots of Lauren's group chats melting down. Her executive women thread turned quiet, then cold. Brooke Sloan switched her profile to private and scrubbed photos like rust. At 9:12 a.m., Lauren called. Then again. Then a wall of texts stacked like bad invoices. We need to control the narrative. It's not what it looks like. Please pick up. I didn't. Frank poured coffee and nudged my phone farther from reach. By lunch, someone sent me a copy of a company memo. Leadership is aware of allegations. Ms. Mercer will be on leave pending review. The word leave did heavier damage than any rumor. Invitations dried up. The PTA mom, who always laughed too hard at Lauren's jokes, untagged half their photos. A deacon commented, "Praying for all involved," which in our town reads like a verdict. At 3:05, one last text. "They're saying I'm finished here, Jack. I need you to tell them we're working it out." I stared at the screen until it dimmed. The woman who once walked through rooms like she owned the deed had just discovered it was rented, on a month-to-month, paid-in reputation. The sun bled out behind the pines and the cabin settled into that old wood quiet, coffee cooling, radio low, my ribs finally forgetting to scream. Then the front window exploded. A brick punched through glass and skidded across the floorboards, trailing shards like sleet. Frank was on his feet before the last pieces fell, killing the lights with 2 quick snaps. We stood in the dark, listening to the night remember itself. He clicked on a flashlight, beam tight, low to the ground. The brick was wrapped in duct tape with a note pinned under it, fat black marker chewing the paper. "Back off or else." Below it, scrawled smaller, "Next time isn't a warning." "Cowards," Frank muttered, sweeping the porch with the light, finding nothing but tire dust and the echo of an engine already gone. He pulled a contractor bag from under the sink. "Don't touch it. We document." We photographed the glass spray, the brick, the note, bagged the mess. My hands shook, not from fear, from clarity. This wasn't control. It was panic with a Sharpie. Frank looked at me over the beam. "They're nervous." "Good," I said. "Nervous men make mistakes. There's a difference between being reckless and being deliberate enough to look reckless." The brick told me Richard Hale was bleeding pride, not power. Good. You don't charge a wounded animal. You rattle the fence until it shows you the hole. I cleared Frank's table, laid out my manila folders like framing lumber, permits, donations, contracts, security, photos, and built a plan with square corners. No late-night brawls. Daylight, paper, laughter. First, I duplicated everything. Thumb drive in Frank's safe, another in a storage unit, a third mailed to Ethan Cole, the only reporter in the county who still returns calls. Then I wrote 5 letters, one to the state AG tip line, one to the ethics board, one to the county auditor, and 2 anonymous notes crafted to sound like different people, dates, places, names that force a follow-up. I scheduled myself like a job site, Tuesday council, Thursday planning commission, Saturday church breakfast. Not to accuse, to ask questions that read on the record. I wasn't swinging a bat anymore. I was tapping studs, finding hollows, and inviting the town to press its ear to the wall. If Hale was a house, I'd make him creak where everyone could hear it. I didn't swing at Richard Hale. I asked questions where microphones live. At the council meeting, I signed in as Jack Mercer, contractor, and read from a clipboard like a man checking joists. For the East Riverside project, could the clerk read the bid sheet into the record and confirm if campaign checks landed the week before the vote? No accusations, just dates and documents lined up like studs. Pens started moving. A camera phone lifted. The clerk's voice wobbled. At the Planning Commission, I thanked them for their service, then wondered aloud why Hale Development won 3 emergency jobs in a row with no weather event on file. At the church breakfast, I asked the deacon if the new gym's donor plaque spelled all the names right. At Gus's diner, I paid for coffee and left copies of minutes and permits on the counter like free newspapers. The local paper ran a bland editorial about sunlight and process. The radio call-in show hummed with "Just Sayin'." PTA moms swapped links. Bartenders traded timestamps. The whisper turned into a conversation you could hear from a block away. I wasn't yelling. I was knocking. Same rhythm, every door. And when the town finally leaned in to listen, I knew it was time to hand the files to someone who could put truth in ink. I met Ethan Cole at a diner 2 towns over, the kind with cracked red booths and a bell that rings whenever the door swings. He looked younger than I expected, sleeves rolled, eyes wired from too much coffee and not enough wins. I slid a manila envelope across Formica. He didn't touch it yet. "Ground rules," I said. "No cowboy journalism, No guesses dressed like facts. You print only what you can prove twice. You protect sources. And if I'm wrong, you burn this and walk." He nodded, serious. "And if you're right? Then you don't write a hit piece. You write a record." We went page by page, council minutes lined up with donation logs, no-bid emergency contracts beside weather reports showing clear skies, Shell LLCs leading back to hail, photos, timestamps, invoices that never matched. I handed over a thumb drive and a list of people who would talk if asked the right way. Denise at Mickey's, Walt in permits, Lydia at the clerk's desk. Ethan outlined FOIA requests, bank subpoena paths, how to nail down hearsay into sworn lines. He finally opened the envelope. "Paper beats power," he said. "Only if it's straight," I answered. "Build it square and it holds." Ethan needed lumber he could nail, so I brought him boards. First, money. I pulled 30 months of statements from our bank's online portal and matched line items to Secretary of State filings, LLCs that looped back to Hale through P.O. boxes and the same 2 registered agents. We circled transfers that landed 48 to 72 hours before council votes and checks to a civic partnership PAC chaired by Hale's attorney. I screen captured metadata, exported CSVs, printed hard copies, duplicates into 3 envelopes. Then, bodies. Denise from Mickey's gave a recorded statement. Tuesdays, black Mercedes in the alley, Marcus Vaughn flashing steel after closing. Walt in permits walked Ethan through emergency contracts with clear sky weather logs. Lydia produced time-stamped donation receipts, same week, same names, same outcomes. Frank, the ex-cop, coached me on affidavits. We notarized them at the UPS counter, fluorescent lights humming while I signed under penalty of perjury. For injuries, I swallowed my pride and went to urgent care, x-rays on the ribs, lacerations photographed, assault by unknown persons in the chart. Date, time, clinician's name, no theatrics, just record. Ethan filed FOIAs, queued bank subpoenas with a friendly DA, and stacked our pile into a frame that could carry weight. Paper doesn't punch like a fist, it holds like a wall. You don't bring down a house with a shout, you bring a dossier that makes the nails give up. I cleared Frank's table and built it like a job. Index, timeline, evidence, appendices. I printed everything twice. Bank CSVs in plain English, council minutes highlighted, donation receipts stapled to vote sheets, property maps with Hale's Shell LLCs traced in red like wiring runs. I added my urgent care records, photo log of bruises with ruler and newspaper date, transcripts of Denise, Walt, Lydia, each signed, notarized, chain of custody clipped to the front. I wrote an executive summary a DA could read between elevators. 5 pages, short paragraphs, who, what, when, how much, cross-refs in the margins like joist hangers, tabs for contracts, money flow, security incidents, retaliation. A 1-page map showed the pattern at a glance. Council, checks, contracts, cash out. 1 binder went to Ethan, 1 to a state AG tip line with tracking, 1 to a bank box under my daughter's birth certificate. A thumb drive sat taped beneath Frank's kitchen drawer, my poor man's dead man switch. If Richard Hale wanted power, I wanted weight. And now I had it, square, level, ready to set. The paper hit town like a hammer. You could hear it. Bundles thudding onto diner counters, the hiss of the vending box as quarters dropped, the bell over Gus's door ringing too fast. Front page, above the fold. Money, power, and no-bid deals. Inside the Hale machine. Byline, Ethan Cole. Subhead, donations before votes. Emergency contracts in clear weather. Intimidation in the alleys. Inside was the skeleton of Richard Hale's empire laid bare. Timelines, maps with red pins, sidebars labeled who benefited and what it cost. Pull quotes from sworn statements. A box on page A3. Local contractor alleges assault. Urgent care records confirm injuries. No drama, just record. Gus's diner went church quiet. Forks hovered. Phones came up. The radio switched from country to call-ins. Lines jammed. Voices shaking with names, dates. I always wondered. City Hall's blinds snapped shut. Hale's Bentley didn't show. His PR statement arrived by lunch. Baseless, politically motivated. It read like drywall overwrought. By afternoon, cameras were on the courthouse steps, and the clerk posted document request backlog in block letters. I didn't smile, I didn't crow. I just folded the paper twice, felt its weight in my hands, and listened for the sound every builder knows, nails starting to pop in a crooked frame. By noon, the polite knock came, the kind that doesn't ask, just waits. 2 suits on Frank's porch, state AG investigator with a leather folio, and a FBI agent whose tie looked like it never loosened. They introduced themselves the way pros do, calm voices, eyes everywhere. I waved them in. Frank poured coffee, and we sat at his scarred pine table like it was a witness stand. They'd read the piece. They had subpoenas queued and requests that felt like orders, copies of my photos, the urgent care records, the calendar exports, the donation logs, names of anyone who spoke to me. I handed over a duplicate binder, tabs, index, the works. The FBI guy turned pages without drama, just steady, methodical. He paused on my affidavit about the alley and the woods, then slid me a form. If I wanted protection, here was the process. I signed where it mattered, not because I was scared, because I was finally being heard. Phones buzzed. The AG investigator asked if Richard Hale contacted me directly since publication. Not yet, I said. He nodded like that was a kind of admission. When they left with boxes, the cabin felt lighter. Paper hadn't just made noise, it had summoned badges. By Friday, the sound that defines a town like ours, nail guns, backup beepers, concrete trucks, went quiet all at once. City Hall posted a notice on the glass. Suspension of Hale-related contracts pending review. The clerk taped copies at every site like foreclosure signs. Crews stood around in hard hats, coffee cooling in gloved hands, reading the same paragraph twice as if a third might change it. On East Riverside, a pump truck idled until the foreman killed it and waved men off the slab. At the new gym wing Hale had sponsored, a banner with his name sagged in the wind while the superintendent chained the gate. Subcontractors started calling each other, then their banks. Lines of credit tightened by lunch. Insurance adjusters sniffed around like dogs that smelled smoke. Hale's PR firm blasted a statement about temporary delays and full cooperation, but the real news traveled faster. Invoices frozen, draws on hold, inspectors reassigned. A supplier told me he got a call asking if he'd extend terms 90 days as a courtesy. He laughed, then didn't. You don't realize how much a single name props up a place until you watch the scaffolding shake under everyone at once. When big men fall, they don't hit the ground. They shed pieces on the way down. Richard Hale's office started bleeding suits first. The receptionist stopped answering Hale Development and switched to a cautious, "Good morning." A repo truck idled at the curb one afternoon and took the Bentley like it was reclaiming a debt from gravity. By evening, the gold-lettered door placard was gone. 2 screw holes staring like missing teeth. Vendors stopped extending terms. Banks reassessed exposure. A partner LLC filed to dissolve. The PR firm that used to write his victory speeches sent a 1-line termination letter. Conflict of interest, effective immediately. Council members who once raced to his ribbon cuttings discovered prior commitments. The mayor's photo with Hale quietly vanished from the city website, replaced by a stock image of a handshake that meant nothing. Inside, the lights stayed on, but the hallways felt abandoned. Security swapped out tailored muscle for rent-a-cops with plastic badges and nervous smiles. Rumors said Marcus Vaughn was on leave. The gym wing banner with Hale's name was taped over for wind damage, even though the day was still. A house doesn't explode when it fails. It groans, boards twist, nails squeal, and then, one morning, you realize it's no longer plumb. In small towns, banishment doesn't need a decree. It happens in the cereal aisle. I saw Lauren at Miller's Market pushing a cart with one hand and cradling her belly with the other. 2 PTA moms split around her like water around a rock, suddenly fascinated by canned peaches on opposite ends of the shelf. The checkout kid who used to flirt with her scanned in silence, eyes on the red laser, not her. By noon, I heard the rest. HR's leave pending review became security escorting her badge to a drawer. The luncheon committee postponed indefinitely. A recruiter who'd promised to circle back stopped taking calls. Even the gym she donated to paused memberships for renovations, which was a polite way of saying, "Don't come in." Brooke Sloan flipped to private and let the friendship die by algorithm. The executive women text thread turned into a wall of unsent bubbles and gray hearts. A deacon offered prayers for healing, which around here reads like a polite "we saw everything." I didn't gloat. I stacked lumber on my porch and listened to hammers from other houses, steady, indifferent. Exile isn't loud. It's the sound of a name that no one says first. Friday night at Mickey's felt like any other. Neon buzz, fried onions, a country song about bad timing. I took a corner stool, kept my ribs against the bar, and let the room talk. Bars are where truth forgets it's supposed to whisper. Denise slid me a club soda and a look that said, "You're going to want to hear this." Two teachers at the high top traded low voices over a shared basket of wings. "He hasn't returned her calls in 2 weeks," one said. "Dropped her like a hot potato the second the story hit." At the far end, a roofing crew replayed the headline between sips. "Hale's wife filed papers," a guy in a camo cap said. "Why buy the side dish when the kitchen's closed?" Laughter, hard, mean, the kind men use when they've been afraid too long. Someone added, "Saw Lauren at the market, no ring, no smile." And another, "Hale's number changed, she's calling a ghost." I didn't join in, I just listened to the verdict roll around the room. Richard Hale cut her loose, fast and clean, like money always does when it smells smoke. I wish I could say the bar talk tasted sweet, but victory has an aftertaste, metallic, like biting your tongue. I walked home under a cold moon and found myself standing on the half-built porch, palms flat on the joists I'd set last spring. From there I could see the road Lauren used to take, the turn where her taillights would disappear. Word traveled faster than tires. Hale changed numbers, papers filed. Lauren left holding a designer bag full of consequences. Part of me wanted to call that justice. Another part saw her at Miller's Market staring too long at a shelf because it was easier than meeting anyone's eyes. I didn't love her anymore, not after the clinic, the lies, the knife at my throat, but grief isn't a switch. You don't flip it off, you wear it until it stops fitting. I sat on the steps with a bottle of water, ribs aching, listening to the house breathe. Satisfaction came and went like a breeze. What stayed was quieter, a steadiness, a line I wouldn't cross again. The town could judge her. I didn't need to. I had boards to set, a spine to keep straight, and a storm still coming. I picked the battleground the way I pick a beam. Check the grain, test the span, make sure it carries meaning. Griggs Mill, the dead factory our road's named for, was perfect. Isolated enough that Richard wouldn't show with a parade. Public enough that the town would eventually walk through and talk. A ruin to match what he'd made of us. I packed my manila envelope, index, tabs, the paper spine of his empire, plus a spare thumb drive taped under the truck's dash. Phone at 100%, battery pack charged, Facebook Live one swipe from ready. I set the stream privacy to public, geotag off, comments on. Not for theatrics, for witnesses. I left Frank a note on the kitchen table. Time, place. If I'm 10 minutes late, call the AG and Ethan. He nodded once when I told him, the way old cops do when they know a man's already decided. I texted Richard from a number he didn't have. Griggs Mill, tonight, no lawyers, no muscle. Come collect what's left of your name. No bat, no bait shrimp. Just paper, Daylight's cousin, and a camera. I wasn't going to beat him. I was going to measure him, in front of anyone who cared to watch. Riggs Mill sits where the river bends, a brick carcass with busted teeth for windows and a smokestack that points at nothing. My boots echoed in the empty loading bay as dusk thinned to iron. Rust smelled like wet pennies. The wind moved through broken panes in a tired organ note. This was where our fathers punched clocks and our mothers packed lunches. Now it was where men like Richard Hale bought nostalgia by the acre and called it vision. I walked the floor, counting paces, finding sight lines. A stairwell with half its treads gone. A catwalk that led nowhere. I tested cell signal, 3 bars, framed the doorway in my camera and set Facebook Live one swipe from go. Manila envelope on a pallet, phone battery at 100, backup pack warming my pocket. I breathed slow, let the place get inside my ribs. If a town has a conscience, it lives in rooms like this, the ones that remember when work meant dignity and a paycheck, not favors and fear. I checked my watch, listened to the river, and waited for headlights to scrape the far wall. Headlights scraped the far wall and died. No Bentley, just a sun-faded Toyota sedan that coughed to a stop and idled like a smoker. The driver's door opened slow. Richard Hale stepped out, silver hair still disciplined but thinner, suit a shade behind the times, the shine knocked off his shoes. In the dim, he looked like a man who'd misplaced a crown and was pretending he hadn't noticed. He scanned the mill's ribcage, found me by the pallet. No entourage, no earpieces, just gravity. "You wanted a meeting," he said, voice sanded down. "Here I am." I nodded at the empty space where arrogance used to stand. "Funny thing about empires," I said. "They look smaller without a parking spot." A flicker crossed his face. Anger, grief, pride refusing to choose. "You think a headline makes you a hero? I think it makes us even." I tapped the manila envelope with a finger. Paper thudded. "This is the rest of it." He glanced back at the tired Toyota, then at my phone on the pallet. Screen awake, live one swipe away. He knew what it meant to be seen and couldn't afford it. That was the first honest thing between us. I set the phone on the pallet, framed Richard Hale between the broken windows and the dead conveyor, and swiped. Live bled red in the corner. "Evening, Griggs Mill," I said, voice steady. "Name's Jack Mercer. This is the man who thought he owned our town." The viewer count jumped. 19, 63, 210. Comments started crawling. "That's Hale. Ask him about East Riverside. He stiffed my brother on a drywall job." Richard stepped sideways. I matched him, keeping him in frame. "Turn that off," he hissed. "Say it on camera," I answered. "Tell folks how emergency contracts follow checks, how enforcers follow objections. Tell them why my ribs click when I breathe." He tried for the old smile and found nothing behind it. I read dates and amounts from the dossier, held up donation receipts, council minutes, a photo of Marcus Vaughn's Mercedes with hazards blinking and shame steaming. The comments sharpened. Former employees, small business owners, a city clerk quoting statute numbers. Richard's jaw trembled. "Are you done?" "Almost," I said, stepping closer so the mic caught it all. "There's one thing men like you never say. Try it. I'm sorry." Silence stretched. Then his voice broke. "I'm sorry." Viewers spiked. The mill finally had something worth making again. Witnesses. The comment feed blurred to a river of names and anger. Richard Hale stood there with the mill wind in his hair and tears cutting clean lines through dust on his face. Not staged tears, the kind that come when the scaffolding finally gives. His shoulders hitched once, twice, and the sound that came out of him wasn't a CEO at a podium. It was a man who'd run out of places to hide. I ended the stream with a thumb press. The red light died. The silence felt heavier than the crowd that had just watched. I picked up the manila envelope and held it between us. "This is everything I didn't put on camera," I said. "Bank paths, affidavits, dates that rhyme too neatly to be chance." He took it with shaking hands, flipped through the tabs, contracts, money flow, security, retaliation, eyes going paler page by page. "You're thorough," he managed. "I build things to hold," I said. He closed the flap, stared at the dead conveyor, and laughed once, short, broken. For the first time since this started, I saw it plain. The king without a kingdom, clutching proof of his own undoing while a contractor handed him the bill. I finished the porch the way you finish a hard winter, board by board, slow and honest. The last plank seated with a clean thunk. The screws bit and held. I wiped the dust, cracked a cold beer, and sat where sunset paints the road the color of forgiveness. The house breathed easy again. So did I. Gravel crunched. Lauren stepped out of a sedan I didn't recognize. Brooke Sloan at her shoulder, both of them looking like the storm had lived in their faces. No makeup that could fix it. No tone of voice that could sell control. "Jack," Lauren said, voice thin, "we need a truce. It's the baby. We can't—" Brooke jumped in, brittle and fast. "You've made your point. Please." I let the bottle sweat in my palm. "I didn't make the point. You did." Lauren's eyes shone. "I'm asking for mercy." I stood, feeling the porch solid under my boots. "Mercy isn't immunity. Actions have consequences. You taught me that. They had no answer for truth, said plain. They left the way they came, quiet, smaller. I sat back down, watched the light fade over fresh lumber, and listened to a sound I'd almost forgotten. Peace.